How Jesus reveals the secrets of prosperity hidden in the Psalms. Prosperity is one of the most misunderstood themes in the Christian walk. People chase it through effort, through pressure, through strategies, through self-improvement, through comparison, through hustling until they are exhausted. They try to unlock doors through sheer force, believing that success is only a matter of discipline, talent, or timing. But deep down, they feel something missing, something not working, something that refuses to move, no matter how much they push. And the more they try to create prosperity on their own strength, the more they feel the quiet, painful truth. They are building on a foundation that cannot hold the weight of their calling. What most believers never realize is that Jesus already revealed the path to true prosperity long before they ever prayed for it. Not through a formula, not through a mindset trick, not through a motivational message, but through the Psalms, the same book he quoted more than any other, the book that shaped his inner world, his peace, his courage, and his spiritual authority. Jesus lived the Psalms. He breathed the Psalms. He fought his battles through the Psalms. And he left them as a roadmap for every believer searching for a prosperity that is real, sustainable, and anchored in God. There is a prosperity hidden within the Psalms that the world cannot understand. A prosperity that does not collapse under pressure. A prosperity that does not depend on perfect circumstances. A prosperity that begins not in the hands, but in the heart. Jesus reveals that prosperity is not about accumulation, it is about alignment, not about chasing, but about positioning, not about striving, but about being rooted in the right presence, the right posture, and the right truth. Many are praying for doors to open, but the Psalms teach that some doors only open for the person who has become prepared to walk through them. Many are praying for more, but the Psalms reveal that God expands what he can trust, not what we demand. Many are praying for breakthrough, but Jesus shows through the Psalms that breakthrough starts in the unseen places. Your mindset, your character, your obedience, your faith, your worship, and your relationship with the Father. Imagine hearing Jesus himself say to you, if you want to understand prosperity, my way, read the Psalms the way I lived them. Suddenly everything changes. Psalm 1 reveals positioning. Psalm 23 reveals peace. Psalm 27 reveals courage. Psalm 91 reveals trust. Psalm 103 reveals gratitude. Psalm 119 reveals wisdom and obedience. Psalm 40 reveals timing. Psalm 37 reveals surrender. Jesus took these truths and embodied them, not as poetry, but as spiritual laws that govern the life of anyone who walks with God. This video will open your eyes to the prosperity Jesus modeled, the kind of prosperity that strengthens your inner world before shaping your outer world, the kind that stabilizes your emotions before expanding your opportunities, the kind that fights your battles in silence before bringing victory in public, the kind that survives storms, delays, rejection, and uncertainty without collapsing, because it is built the same way Jesus built his life, on the revelation hidden within the Psalms. If you stay with me, you will discover that prosperity is not far from you. It is not complicated. It is not unreachable. It has simply been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment your heart becomes ready to see it. And Jesus is about to lead you there, step by step, through the very Psalms he anchored his life upon. Jesus did not choose the Psalms by accident. He did not quote them randomly. He anchored his life in them because the Psalms carry a level of spiritual revelation that shapes the inner world of anyone who reads them with openness. They train the heart, the mind, and the spirit. They confront fear, they build trust, they teach surrender, they reveal the character of God. And Jesus used them as the foundation of his strength long before he ever stepped into public ministry. If you look closely, you'll see something extraordinary. Whenever Jesus faced emotional pressure, spiritual warfare, or moments of deep decision, he turned to the Psalms. They were not just scripture to him, they were identity, they were language, they were alignment, they were truth strong enough to silence every lie that tried to rise against him. The Psalms taught him how to stand in the Father's presence without fear. They shaped the way he prayed, the way he endured suffering, the way he embraced surrender, and the way he walked with unshakable peace. When Jesus was on the cross, the darkest moment of his earthly life, he did not quote a proverb, he did not recite a parable, he did not repeat a teaching. He reached into the Psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me?" That was Psalm 22. Even in agony, the Psalms were the anchor that held his spirit steady. If the Son of God himself turned to the Psalms at the moment of greatest pain, what does that say about the power hidden inside them? The Psalms reveal something rare, the full spectrum of human emotion surrendered to the full power of God's presence. They show you how to cry out without losing faith, how to wait without losing hope, how to fight battles without losing yourself, how to trust when nothing makes sense, how to walk through fear without becoming controlled by it. Jesus absorbed these truths until they became part of his inner structure, the structure from which true prosperity flows. Prosperity begins in the mind, and the Psalms shape the mind. Prosperity begins in the heart, and the Psalms heal the heart. Prosperity begins in identity, and the Psalms reveal identity. Jesus lived with such clarity, such authority, and such peace because he lived from the Psalms. They trained him not only to survive spiritual pressure, but to overcome it with confidence. When he taught about putting God first, he was echoing Psalm 37. When he taught about trusting the Father's protection, he was echoing Psalm 91. When he taught about purity of heart, he was echoing Psalm 24. When he taught about gratitude and remembering God's benefits, he was echoing Psalm 103. Jesus did not pull his wisdom from culture, from philosophy, or from emotion. His wisdom was shaped in the secret place through the Psalms. If Jesus, perfect, sinless, and filled with the Spirit, relied on the Psalms to order his inner life, how much more do we need them? Every believer who desires prosperity must understand this truth. You cannot build a stable outer life with an unstable inner world. The Psalms stabilize the inside, so God can prosper the outside. Jesus models that prosperity begins not with asking, but with anchoring. Before God expands your life, he strengthens your foundation. Before he multiplies what you have, he multiplies who you are. And the Psalms are the training ground where this transformation happens. Now that you understand why Jesus rooted himself in the Psalms, it's time to uncover the first prosperity secret they reveal. The prosperity of presence, the foundation of Psalm 1. Prosperity begins long before increase ever touches your hands. It begins with presence. Psalm 1 reveals a truth so simple that most people overlook it entirely. The environment you choose determines the fruit you carry. Jesus understood this better than anyone. He knew that prosperity is not first about effort, it is about positioning. Prosperity flows from the presence you dwell in, the voices you listen to, the influences you allow, and the atmosphere your heart stays rooted in. Psalm 1 describes the blessed person as someone who refuses to sit, walk, or stand in places that drain spiritual strength, not because they are superior, but because they understand a law of the Spirit. Whatever shapes your environment shapes your outcome. Jesus lived this principle constantly. He withdrew to be alone with the Father. He distanced himself from crowds when their noise became a distraction. He walked away from environments that did not align with his mission. He protected his inner atmosphere with fierce intentionality. Prosperity cannot grow in a heart surrounded by voices that contradict God. It cannot flourish in a mind filled with noise, fear, gossip, or negativity. It cannot be sustained in a person who entertains influences that weaken conviction. Psalm 1 shows that success begins with separation, the courage to step away from what corrupts your peace and step into the presence that strengthens your spirit. Jesus modeled this perfectly. His strength didn't come from talent or strategy, it came from presence. His clarity came from presence. His authority came from presence. His wisdom came from presence. He understood that a person can only bear fruit in the season appointed if their roots are deep enough to reach the water that sustains them. Without presence, there is no nourishment. Without nourishment, there is no growth. Without growth, there is no prosperity. Psalm 1 says that the blessed person is like a tree planted by streams of water. That stream is not effort, it is not ambition, it is not the approval of people, it is the constant presence of God shaping the inner world. A tree planted in the wrong place will dry up no matter how much it desires to grow. A believer planted in the wrong environment will feel blocked no matter how much they pray for breakthrough. Jesus reveals that prosperity is impossible without the right presence. You cannot carry divine fruit while being rooted in environments that contradict your calling. You cannot walk in God's abundance while sitting in atmospheres that drain your faith. You cannot expect supernatural growth while surrounding yourself with what God is trying to remove. Presence aligns your spirit. Presence organizes your thoughts. Presence purifies your intentions. Presence breaks spiritual fog. Presence brings clarity, strength, and vision. Prosperity finds you when your soul is rooted in the stream that never dries. Many people think they are waiting for God to prosper them, but God is waiting for them to reposition themselves. Not physically, but spiritually. The moment you choose presence over pressure, everything shifts. You begin to notice your mind clearing, your emotions calming, your decisions becoming wiser, your confidence rising, your path becoming straighter. Prosperity follows presence because presence produces everything prosperity requires. Now that you see how positioning unlocks prosperity, the next step reveals a deeper truth that Jesus embodied. Prosperity increases when your desire aligns with your devotion. And that is the hidden law of delight. Delight is one of the most misunderstood words in Scripture. Many people think delight is an emotion, a feeling of excitement, a spiritual high. But in the Psalms, delight is not emotional, it is directional. It is the orientation of the heart. It is where your soul chooses to turn when life becomes heavy. It is what you value most, what you seek first, what you trust deepest. And Jesus reveals through his life that prosperity flows when desire aligns with devotion. Psalm 1 says, "The blessed person delights in the law of the Lord." This means their inner world leans toward God, not toward fear, pressure, or self-reliance. Their heart finds joy not in outcomes, but in the one who directs outcomes. Jesus lived this truth so consistently that his entire life became a demonstration of how delight transforms destiny. When Jesus woke up, his heart turned toward the Father. When he felt weary, he returned to the Father. When he faced opposition, he relied on the Father. His delight was not a moment, it was his default posture. That is why he carried peace in storms, clarity in confusion, courage in the face of threats, and wisdom in moments where others would panic. Delight sustained him, empowered him, and positioned him for everything the Father entrusted to him. Delight is powerful because it determines your internal climate. When you delight in God, your soul stops chasing what was never meant to satisfy you. You no longer crave validation from people who cannot understand your calling. You no longer run after opportunities that drain you. You no longer attach your worth to achievements. Your heart becomes anchored in something eternal, and that stability becomes the soil where prosperity grows. The law of delight reveals this truth. What you enjoy shapes what you attract. If your soul delights in fear, you attract confusion. If your soul delights in people's approval, you attract anxiety. If your soul delights in control, you attract frustration. But when your soul delights in God, you attract clarity, peace, and direction. Prosperity follows hearts that are aligned, not hearts that are restless. This is why Jesus never chased the things people chase today. He didn't run after money, status, reputation, or opportunity. He delighted in the Father, and everything he needed found him. Provision found him. Wisdom found him. Influence found him. Strength found him. When delight is right, blessing does not need to be forced. It flows. Delight also purifies motives. When you seek God for who He is, not for what He can give, your intentions become clean. Your desires become aligned with His will. You stop praying desperate prayers for outcomes and start praying confident prayers for alignment. You understand that prosperity is not about getting more from God, but becoming more like God in the way you think, decide, and live. Psalm 37 reveals the same law. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Not because He grants every wish, but because He transforms your heart until your desires reflect His wisdom. Jesus embodied this perfectly. His desires were the Father's desires. His plans were the Father's plans. And because of that alignment, He walked in continuous spiritual prosperity. When you begin to delight in God, your inner world shifts. Peace replaces pressure. Clarity replaces confusion. Gratitude replaces comparison. Faith replaces fear. And that shift prepares you for the next revelation. Prosperity is impossible without the peace that guards your soul. Jesus reveals that peace is not a feeling, it is a spiritual wealth. And no psalm exposes this truth more profoundly than Psalm 23. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of the shepherd. Psalm 23 is often read as comforting poetry, but Jesus reveals it as a blueprint, a spiritual architecture for a prosperous inner life. Prosperity collapses in a restless mind. Prosperity withers in an anxious heart. Prosperity suffocates where fear dominates decisions. Jesus shows that lasting prosperity begins with a soul anchored in peace, not pressure. Psalm 23 begins with a truth that reshapes everything. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. This is not a declaration of material abundance, it is the foundation of internal abundance. Jesus lived with this certainty. He never doubted the Father's provision, guidance, or protection. He had peace not because life was easy, but because his trust was established. His prosperity began in stillness, not in striving. Peace is prosperity because it clears the mind, calms the heart, and aligns the spirit. When Jesus walked through storms, literal and spiritual, he remained centered. People panicked. Circumstances raged, pressure increased, yet his peace remained unshaken. That peace was not personality. It was Psalm 23 alive inside him. He leads me beside still waters. Jesus knew how to follow the Father's pace. He did not rush ahead in fear. He did not make decisions from anxiety. He did not move from impulse. Prosperity requires pacing. Many people are exhausted not because they lack blessing, but because they lack rest. They carry the weight of tomorrow without drinking from the still waters available today. Jesus drank deeply from the presence of the Father, and that is why his soul remained replenished. He restores my soul. Restoration is one of the greatest forms of prosperity. A restored mind thinks clearly. A restored heart loves freely. A restored identity makes wise decisions. Jesus walked with restoration daily because he stayed close to the one who restores. Prosperity is impossible for the person who refuses to let God heal the parts they keep hiding. Jesus embraced inner restoration constantly, and that is why he carried strength that could endure betrayal, misunderstanding, and suffering. He guides me in paths of righteousness. Prosperity requires direction, God's direction, not human intuition. Jesus did nothing independently. He moved where the Father led. He spoke what the Father said. He embraced what the Father allowed. His prosperity flowed from obedience to divine guidance, not from pursuing his own plans. You cannot prosper while walking on a path God did not assign to you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Jesus walked through valleys, loneliness, rejection, temptation, betrayal, but fear never became his master. Prosperity with fear is impossible. Fear makes you shrink, retreat, doubt, and self-sabotage. Jesus reveals that courage is not the absence of fear, it is trust in the presence of the shepherd. Peace gives you the strength to keep moving when everything in you wants to stop. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Jesus lived this. No enemy could stop his purpose. No resistance could block his assignment. Prosperity is not the absence of attack. It is the confidence that God positions you in victory even when surrounded by opposition. A person aligned with the shepherd is never outnumbered, never unprotected, never abandoned. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me. Jesus walked with the certainty that God's goodness was not seasonal. It was constant. It was intentional. It was faithful. Prosperity flourishes in a heart convinced of God's goodness, not one trapped in doubt. Psalm 23 is not a song. It is a system. It is prosperity produced from peace. Jesus lived it to show us how to build a life that cannot be shaken. Once you grasp peace as spiritual wealth, you are ready for the next revelation. Prosperity demands courage, and the Psalms expose a battle few ever recognize. Prosperity is not handed to the passive, it is entrusted to the courageous. Psalm 27 exposes a truth many people ignore. Every step toward prosperity triggers a battle, internally, spiritually, and emotionally. Jesus understood this with absolute clarity. He knew that prosperity is not just about receiving from God. It is about resisting everything that tries to stop what God is giving. Psalm 27 begins with a declaration that shaped Jesus' entire walk. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Fear is the greatest enemy of prosperity because it attacks the mind before it ever attacks circumstances. Fear convinces you that you are alone, unprepared, unworthy, or too late. Fear makes small obstacles look impossible. Fear suffocates vision. And Jesus overcame fear not by avoiding it, but by confronting it with truth. Every time Jesus stepped into new territory, whether teaching, healing, confronting darkness, or moving toward his purpose, opposition increased. People questioned him. Religious leaders attacked him. Crowds misunderstood him. Even his own disciples doubted him. Yet he kept moving. Prosperity requires this kind of resilience, the courage to advance when everything around you suggests retreat. Psalm 27 reveals that courage is not noise, it is focus. One thing I ask of the Lord, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord. Jesus lived with this single-minded devotion. He wasn't distracted by applause or intimidated by criticism. His courage came from clarity. He knew his calling, and he knew the one who sent him. Prosperity collapses when you let people's opinions define your direction. The psalm continues, "Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear." Jesus faced spiritual battles, emotional pressure and human resistance, yet his heart remained steady, not because he lacked battles, but because he lacked divided focus. Prosperity demands the courage to stay committed even when the enemy tries to intimidate you with delays, conflicts, or uncertainties. Psalm 27 also exposes another hidden truth. Breakthrough often comes after resistance intensifies. Even if war rises against me, in this I will be confident. Many people quit right before God moves. They step back when the pressure rises, not realizing the pressure is a sign they are close to alignment. Jesus never interpreted resistance as failure. He interpreted it as confirmation. The psalm adds, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage." Here lies a prosperity secret Jesus embodied perfectly. Courage is not only needed to act, courage is needed to wait. Waiting feels like weakness, but in God's system, waiting is warfare. It strengthens patience, it deepens trust, it reveals motives, it exposes attachments, it purifies desires. Jesus waited for the Father's timing in everything, even when people tried to rush him. Prosperity requires the courage to move when God says move, and the courage to wait when God says wait, courage to speak when truth is needed, and courage to stay silent when silence protects your purpose. Courage to confront what is holding you back, and courage to walk away from what God is no longer blessing. Jesus modeled every form of courage, revealing that prosperity is not for the comfortable, it is for the committed. Psalm 27 ends with a promise. You will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Jesus lived with this confidence every day. He knew that the Father's goodness was not an idea, it was a certainty. Prosperity flows to the heart that refuses to let fear decide its future. Now that you understand prosperity requires courage, the next revelation Jesus demonstrates is even more powerful. Worship unlocks what effort cannot. Prosperity is not only built through discipline, wisdom, or strategy. There's a dimension of prosperity that effort alone can never reach. Psalm 34 and Psalm 100 reveal a secret Jesus understood deeply. Worship breaks resistances that work cannot. Praise shifts atmospheres before circumstances shift. Worship opens doors in the unseen so the seen can respond. Prosperity grows fastest in a heart that knows how to praise before the breakthrough, not after. Jesus lived this. When pressure increased, he worshipped. When his soul felt burdened, he prayed with thanksgiving. When darkness tried to close in, he lifted his eyes to the Father. His miracles did not flow only from power, they flowed from alignment, and alignment comes through worship. Praise realigns whatever anxiety, fear, or doubt tries to distort. Psalm 34 begins with one of the most important prosperity principles in Scripture. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Praise at all times means praise in all seasons, times of abundance, times of lack, times of clarity, times of confusion. Jesus practiced this. He thanked the Father before multiplying bread. He worshipped before raising Lazarus. He blessed God before stepping into battles. He used worship as preparation, not as celebration. Praise is prosperity because it changes the inner atmosphere. Worry drains strength. Praise restores it. Fear shrinks your spirit. Praise expands it. Complaint closes doors. Praise opens them. Jesus faced spiritual warfare, emotional heaviness, and human pressure, yet praise kept him grounded, clear, and stable. Worship also disarms the enemy. Psalm 100 reveals that praise is not just expression, it is entry. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Jesus knew that access to God's presence is the highest form of prosperity. In God's presence, clarity appears. In God's presence, wisdom flows. In God's presence, fear dissolves. In God's presence, provision is released. Doors open not because you push harder, but because heaven responds to a heart positioned in praise. Praise is spiritual warfare. It breaks cycles of discouragement. It interrupts patterns of negativity. It silences the voices that try to weaken your faith. When Jesus worshipped, darkness lost its hold. When Jesus thanked the Father, miracles moved from the unseen into the seen. When Jesus lifted his voice, the atmosphere shifted around him. Psalm 34 adds another prosperity secret. Those who look to him are radiant. Praise doesn't only change the spirit, it changes the countenance. It changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you think. People can feel the shift even if they can't explain it. Radiance attracts favor. Radiance attracts opportunity. Radiance attracts divine connections. Worship also breaks self-reliance. It reminds the soul that God is the source, not your strategy. It humbles pride, it softens the heart, it purifies motives. Prosperity collapses when pride quietly takes the throne. Praise dethrones pride and puts God back at the center. Jesus reveals that worship prepares you for prosperity because it prepares you for responsibility. A heart that praises in the valley can be trusted on the mountain. A heart that stays grateful in pressure will stay humble in promotion. Worship makes prosperity safe. As praise unlocks the spiritual realm, another truth emerges. Prosperity cannot be sustained without purity. The Psalms expose a deeper principle Jesus embodied, the power of clean hands and a pure heart. Prosperity is never just about what you receive. It is about what you can sustain, and nothing destroys prosperity faster than a heart unprepared for blessing. Psalm 24 reveals a principle Jesus embodied perfectly. Who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart. Prosperity is a spiritual elevation. It lifts you, it expands you, it increases your influence. But elevation requires purity, or else blessing becomes a burden, and success becomes an opening for destruction. Jesus carried unparalleled spiritual authority because his inner world was clean. His motives were pure. His intentions were aligned with the Father. He did not seek fame, applause, control, or recognition. He lived with a purity that made him unshakable. He could handle crowds without losing humility. He could handle rejection without losing love. He could handle betrayal without becoming bitter. His prosperity was protected by his purity. Clean hands represent actions that align with God. Jesus acted from compassion, not self-interest. He healed from love, not pride. He confronted from truth, not ego. Every action flowed from integrity. Clean hands protect prosperity because they allow God to trust you with more. God does not withhold blessing, he withholds destruction. He waits for the heart to mature so the blessing does not become poison. A pure heart represents motives that are aligned with heaven. Jesus did not use his gifts to build his own kingdom. He used everything the Father gave him for the Father's purpose. Purity protects intention. It keeps the heart from chasing prosperity for validation, identity, or power. Prosperity given to an impure heart becomes a trap. Prosperity given to a pure heart becomes ministry. Psalm 24 reveals a pattern. Elevation follows purification. Many people pray for God to take them higher, but God is trying to take them deeper, deeper into honesty, deeper into humility, deeper into surrender, deeper into self-awareness, deeper into motives. Purity is not perfection. Purity is alignment. It is the willingness to allow God to remove whatever contaminates your intentions. Jesus reveals that true prosperity is impossible without purity, because prosperity amplifies whatever is inside you. If the heart carries insecurity, prosperity multiplies insecurity. If the heart carries pride, prosperity magnifies pride. If the heart carries ambition detached from purpose, prosperity accelerates destruction. But when the heart carries purity, prosperity multiplies impact, influence, and blessing without damaging the soul. Clean hands also protect relationships. Jesus interacted with people from a place of truth, compassion, and spiritual clarity. Prosperity cannot thrive in relationships built on manipulation, jealousy, or hidden agendas. Clean hands restore trust. Pure hearts build peace. Prosperity flows where relationships are healed and motives are honest. Purity also brings discernment. Jesus could see through traps, false intentions, and manipulative agendas because his heart was pure. Purity sharpens spiritual vision. It makes you sensitive to God's leading. It reveals dangers before they appear. Prosperity is endangered when you lack discernment, but protected when your heart is clean. Psalm 24 ends with a powerful promise. Lift up your heads, for the King of Glory is coming in. Purity prepares the soul to receive God's presence in a deeper way, and God's presence is the foundation of all prosperity. Once purity is established, another powerful prosperity secret emerges. One Jesus lived every day. Gratitude multiplies what you already have. And the Psalms show why gratitude is not optional, it is transformative. Gratitude is more than an attitude, it is a spiritual force. Psalm 103 reveals a prosperity principle that Jesus understood deeply. The soul must remember before it can expand. Forgetfulness is one of the great enemies of prosperity. When the heart forgets what God has done, it begins to fear what God has not yet done. When the soul forgets God's past faithfulness, it becomes blind to present blessings and anxious about the future. Gratitude restores sight. Gratitude restores strength. Gratitude restores perspective. Psalm 103 begins with a command to the soul itself. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Gratitude is not passive. It is a discipline. It is the deliberate act of bringing to mind the goodness that fear tries to bury. Jesus practiced this throughout his life. Before multiplying bread, he gave thanks. Before raising Lazarus, he gave thanks. Before facing the cross, he thanked the Father for hearing him. Gratitude was not something Jesus felt. It was something he chose. Gratitude is prosperity because it multiplies what you already have. When you acknowledge God's goodness, you become aware of resources you overlooked, strengths you forgot, victories you minimized, and protection you never noticed. Gratitude opens your eyes. Prosperity requires eyes that see beyond lack, limitation, and delay. Gratitude trains your soul to look for God's hand instead of focusing on what is missing. Psalm 103 lists the benefits: forgiveness, healing, redemption, compassion, renewal, justice, and steadfast love. These are not poetic ideas, they are foundations of prosperity. A forgiven soul carries confidence, a healed soul carries strength, a redeemed soul carries identity, a soul surrounded by compassion carries peace, a renewed soul carries resilience, a soul grounded in God's love carries unshakable security. Jesus lived from this wealth long before any external blessing appeared. Gratitude shifts the emotional climate. Complaint multiplies frustration. Comparison multiplies insecurity. Anxiety multiplies fear. But gratitude multiplies faith. Jesus never lived in comparison. He never lived in fear. He never lived in dissatisfaction. Gratitude kept his inner world full even when his outer world was demanding. Prosperity flourishes in a heart that refuses to let negativity lead. Gratitude also breaks entitlement. Entitlement destroys prosperity because it convinces the heart that God owes something. Jesus lived with a posture of humility. He received everything as gift, not as reward. Gratitude keeps the heart soft, humble, and teachable. A grateful heart can be trusted with abundance because it will not turn abundance into pride. Psalm 103 also reveals that gratitude strengthens the spirit in times of pressure. Bless the Lord, you his angels. Bless the Lord, all his works. Gratitude connects your voice with the voice of heaven. It pulls your soul into alignment with the divine rhythm. It silences the noise that tries to distort your perspective. Gratitude is not denial, it is revelation. It sees what God is doing even when circumstances are slow, painful, or unclear. Jesus shows that gratitude is not a reaction to blessing. It is the atmosphere that invites blessing. A grateful heart attracts clarity, wisdom, favor, and direction. It creates mental and spiritual space for God to pour out more. Gratitude prepares the soul for expansion. Now that gratitude has purified your perspective, the next prosperity secret becomes clear. Prosperity is impossible without obedience. And Psalm 119 reveals why obedience is not a burden. It is stability, wisdom, and spiritual safety. Obedience is one of the most underestimated forms of prosperity. Many people think prosperity begins with opportunity, talent, or strategy. But Psalm 119 reveals that prosperity begins with alignment. Alignment with God's will. Alignment with His principles. Alignment with His direction. Jesus lived with extraordinary stability because He followed the Father with unwavering obedience. His prosperity was rooted not in constant activity, but in consistent alignment. Psalm 119 repeatedly emphasizes that those who walk according to God's instruction experience blessing, clarity, and strength. Not because obedience earns God's favor, but because obedience positions the heart to receive what God already desires to give. Jesus understood this perfectly. He said, "I only do what I see the Father doing." That was not limitation, it was liberation. Obedience protected His purpose. It preserved His peace. It eliminated confusion. He wasted no time, no energy, no emotion pursuing what the Father was not leading Him into. Many believers are exhausted not because they lack strength, but because they lack direction. Obedience gives direction. It removes the guessing, the confusion, and the cycle of starting and stopping. Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." A lamp doesn't illuminate the entire journey, it reveals the next step. Jesus lived step by step with the Father. This is why His life advanced with precision, purpose, and power. Prosperity requires this clarity. Without obedience, even good opportunities become distractions. Obedience also creates internal stability. Psalm 119 declares, "Great peace have those who love your law. Nothing can make them stumble." Jesus was unshakable because obedience made His foundation unshakable. Storms came, but He stood firm. Temptations came, but He stayed steady. Attacks came, but He remained focused. Obedience removes the cracks through which fear, insecurity, and temptation enter. A person aligned with God becomes spiritually stable, emotionally grounded, and mentally clear. Another hidden prosperity key in Psalm 119 is humility. "Teach me, Lord, give me understanding." Prosperity collapses in the presence of pride. Pride convinces you that you already know. Pride resists correction. Pride blocks wisdom. Jesus, though perfect, walked in complete humility. He submitted to the Father's instruction daily. He sought the Father's voice. He valued the Father's wisdom above his own desires. Obedience flows naturally in a humble heart. Obedience also protects prosperity by keeping you out of places where the enemy has authority. Many people pray for protection while walking into environments God never sent them into. Jesus avoided traps, schemes, and spiritual dangers because He followed divine direction, not human pressure. Psalm 119 reveals that obedience becomes a shield. "I have kept your word in my heart that I might not sin against you." Sin weakens, but obedience strengthens. Sin confuses, but obedience clarifies. Sin drains, but obedience restores. Prosperity also requires consistency, and obedience creates consistency. Jesus didn't obey when convenient, He obeyed because He trusted the Father completely. Psalm 119 describes a person whose steps, decisions, and desires align with God's ways. This consistency builds character, and character is the container that holds prosperity safely. Obedience is not about legalism, it is about liberation. Jesus shows that obedience frees you from the pressure of having to figure out your own life. It frees you from the burden of guessing. It frees you from the traps of impulsive decisions. It frees you from fear of the future. It frees you from the chaos of self-reliance. Prosperity expands in a soul at peace with God's direction. Once obedience establishes stability, the next prosperity secret becomes possible: trust. And there is no psalm that reveals the prosperity of trust more powerfully than Psalm 91. Trust is the atmosphere where prosperity breathes. Without trust, even the greatest blessings feel fragile, even the clearest direction feels uncertain, even the strongest calling feels overwhelming. Psalm 91 reveals a level of protection, confidence, and spiritual stability that only trust can produce. Jesus embodied this trust perfectly, showing that prosperity grows in a soul that rests, not in a soul that fears. Psalm 91 begins with a profound truth. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Jesus lived in that secret place. His strength came from intimacy. His clarity came from communion. His courage came from nearness. Prosperity is impossible for the person who only visits God occasionally. Prosperity flows from those who dwell, those who remain, those who abide, those who stay connected. Trust removes the desperation that sabotages prosperity. A fearful soul forces outcomes. A trusting soul follows God's timing. A fearful soul panics at delay. A trusting soul rests in God's pace. Jesus waited for the Father's leading in everything. He never rushed into opportunities simply because they were available. He never moved from anxiety. His trust was unwavering, and that trust is what carried him through every spiritual attack. Psalm 91 declares, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress." Trust is not silent, it speaks. Jesus spoke truth when tempted. He declared scripture when confronted. He used his voice to anchor his soul in God's promises. Prosperity requires a disciplined voice. Many believers speak fear more fluently than faith. They declare worst-case scenarios instead of God's word. Jesus modeled the power of speaking trust until the heart aligns with heaven. Trust also protects the mind. You shall not fear the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day. Jesus faced both internal and external attacks, yet he never panicked. Trust stabilized him. Fear amplifies the enemy's voice. Trust amplifies God's. Fear sees obstacles. Trust sees opportunity. Fear sees danger. Trust sees protection. Jesus looked at every situation through the lens of Psalm 91, covered, protected, guided, and upheld by the Father. Psalm 91 adds, "1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you." Trust creates spiritual immunity. Jesus walked through places where others fell, but he remained untouched because his trust placed him under divine covering. Prosperity cannot thrive in a heart convinced that danger is always near. Trust allows you to move boldly, confidently, and purposefully, even when surrounded by uncertainty. Trust also dismantles the enemy's strategy. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Jesus rested under that covering. He did not respond to threats with fear. He responded with confidence in the Father's protection. Prosperity demands this level of assurance. Without trust, every challenge feels final. With trust, every challenge becomes temporary. Another truth emerges from Psalm 91. Trust breaks the spirit of control. Many people sabotage prosperity because they cannot surrender. They try to manage outcomes, force timelines, manipulate circumstances. Trust frees you from the exhausting demand to hold everything together. Jesus never operated from control. He operated from surrender, believing the Father's plan was wiser, stronger, and better. Psalm 91 concludes with promises, deliverance, protection, honor, long life, and salvation. Jesus lived in these promises, and they sustained him through every season. Prosperity expands when the soul is convinced that God's goodness is not fragile, seasonal, or conditional. Trust secures prosperity because it secures the heart. Now that trust has anchored your spirit, the next prosperity revelation emerges. Waiting. Not passive waiting, but divine waiting, the kind Jesus lived, and Psalm 40 reveals with stunning clarity. Waiting is one of the greatest tests of prosperity. Not waiting for blessings, but waiting with the right posture while God prepares you for them. Psalm 40 reveals a truth that Jesus embodied perfectly. Prosperity collapses when timing is forced, but flourishes when timing is surrendered. Most people don't struggle because God is slow. They struggle because their heart is restless. Psalm 40 begins with a statement many overlook: I waited patiently for the Lord. This is not passive delay. This is disciplined trust. This is willingness to stand still until God moves. Jesus mastered this posture. He waited for the Father before speaking, before traveling, before choosing disciples, before performing miracles, before stepping into his purpose. His waiting was not weakness. It was wisdom. It was protection. It was alignment. Many people destroy their own prosperity because they cannot wait well. They rush into relationships that break them. They run ahead into opportunities that drain them. They enter environments God never approved. They try to build what God has not blessed. Waiting reveals whether your heart trusts God's pace or demands its own. Psalm 40 continues, He inclined to me and heard my cry. Waiting well is not silence. Waiting well is communion. Jesus waited by drawing closer to the Father, not by stepping back. Waiting well means you pray, listen, reflect, surrender, realign. It means you let God shape your desires instead of letting anxiety shape your decisions. Jesus waited in prayer, which is why his steps were always precise. He brought me up out of a pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock. Waiting is a rescue mission. God uses waiting to pull you out of unstable identities, toxic habits, rushed impulses, emotional chaos, and spiritual confusion. Jesus never operated from instability. He waited until the Father secured his footing, then he moved with authority. Prosperity demands stability. Waiting creates stability. He put a new song in my mouth. Waiting transforms worship. Most people worship loudly when God does something, but waiting well produces worship before the outcome. Jesus thanked the Father before the miracle. Waiting deepens gratitude, deepens perspective, and deepens spiritual maturity. Prosperity flows to the person whose worship is not dependent on circumstances. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord. Waiting reveals whether you rely on God or on convenience. Jesus never traded long-term purpose for short-term relief. Prosperity is often delayed not because God is withholding, but because you are still learning to wait without complaining, doubting, or forcing. Psalm 40 also reveals that waiting is preparation. Your plans for us are too many to declare. Waiting enlarges capacity. It tests character. It strengthens resilience. It exposes idols. It reveals whether you want God's will or just God's speed. Jesus waited 30 years before stepping into 3 years of ministry, not because he was unprepared, but because he followed divine timing. When God finally released him, everything accelerated. Prosperity always accelerates once timing aligns. Waiting also protects you from premature elevation. A blessing given too early becomes a burden. A door opened too soon becomes a trap. God delays not to punish you, but to preserve you. Jesus trusted this logic completely. He refused to rush. He refused to manipulate. He refused to force the Father's hand. His prosperity was rooted in patience. Psalm 40 ends with a reminder, "The Lord takes thought for me." Waiting well means believing you are not forgotten. Delay is not neglect. It is divine sequencing. God aligns people, prepares environments, shifts circumstances, and strengthens your spirit while you wait. Prosperity requires this synchronization. Jesus lived synchronized with heaven's timing, and his life reflects the power of divine order. Once waiting has shaped your heart, the final prosperity key becomes clear, the one Jesus demonstrated from the beginning to the end of his earthly life: surrender. And Psalm 37 reveals why surrender is the master key that unlocks everything. Surrender is not giving up. It is giving God the place He was always meant to have. Psalm 37 reveals the final and deepest secret of prosperity, a truth Jesus embodied from His first breath to His last. Prosperity begins when control ends. The greatest battles in life are fought not with the enemy, but with our own desire to manage timing, outcomes, people, and circumstances. Jesus shows that surrender is not weakness. It is alignment with divine power. Psalm 37 begins with a command that confronts the restless. Do not fret. Anxiety is a symptom of misplaced control. Jesus never lived from anxiety because His trust was complete. He surrendered outcomes to the Father. He surrendered timelines. He surrendered reputation. He surrendered comfort. He surrendered His own will in Gethsemane and said the words that define true prosperity. Not my will, but yours. That sentence breaks every form of internal bondage. Psalm 37 continues with a progression that reveals the anatomy of surrender. Trust in the Lord and do good. Trust is the foundation. You cannot surrender to someone you do not trust. Jesus trusted the Father completely, which freed Him from fear of loss, fear of delay, fear of danger, and fear of failure. Prosperity grows in a soul no longer paralyzed by fear. Delight yourself in the Lord. Surrender changes desire. Jesus delighted in the Father to the point that His desires aligned with heaven's desires. Prosperity becomes safe when your desires are shaped by God, not by insecurity, comparison, or pressure. Jesus never chased what others chased. He chased the Father's will, and prosperity flowed naturally. Commit your way to the Lord. Commitment is movement. It is obedience in action. Jesus committed His entire path: relationships, assignments, travels, miracles, moments of solitude, into the Father's hands. Commitment breaks the illusion of self-reliance. It removes double-mindedness. Prosperity requires consistency, and surrender creates consistency. Be still before the Lord. Stillness is not inactivity, it is inner clarity. Jesus knew how to be still, even when crowds demanded Him, enemies watched Him, and pressure surrounded Him. Stillness is prosperity because it preserves peace. A still heart hears God clearly. A restless heart invents its own noise. Jesus operated from stillness, and that stillness produced strength. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Surrender heals emotional reactions. Jesus did not allow anger, bitterness, or resentment to distort His decisions. He stayed gentle, pure, and focused. Prosperity dies in hearts poisoned by resentment, jealousy, or frustration. Surrender purifies emotions, so blessing can flow. The meek shall inherit the land. Meekness is misunderstood. It is not weakness. Meekness is controlled strength. Jesus was the perfect example. He had power, yet He remained surrendered. He had authority, yet He remained humble. He had influence, yet He remained obedient. Meekness opens doors, pride will always close. Prosperity requires humility, and Jesus demonstrated humility at the highest level. Psalm 37 then gives one of the most powerful prosperity promises. Commit your way to the Lord, and He will act. Prosperity is not created by human strength, it is released by divine action. When the heart is surrendered, God begins to move in ways you could never engineer. He orders steps, He opens doors, He removes obstacles, He aligns opportunities, He exposes deception, He protects your path. Jesus lived in the momentum of God's actions, not the pressure of His own effort. Surrender is the final key because it brings everything together. Presence becomes deeper, delight becomes stronger, peace becomes unshakable, courage becomes natural, praise becomes effortless. Purity becomes desirable, gratitude becomes constant, obedience becomes joyful, trust becomes instinctive, waiting becomes peaceful, and prosperity flows without distortion. Jesus reveals that prosperity is not something you chase. It is something you receive when the heart is aligned, the soul is anchored, and the will is surrendered. Psalm 37 closes with a promise for those who surrender. The Lord upholds them. Prosperity cannot fall when God is the one holding it. If you are ready to walk in prosperity God's way, let your heart whisper the prayer Jesus lived. Lord, teach me to prosper your way.